Welcome back to Introduction to iOS Application Development at SSFS. Well, we've got our login functionality working, so let's go ahead and start getting our quiz questions ready. So we're going to work on our home view controller for right now, and let's go ahead and set up the assistant editor so we can see both our home view controller, and make sure it's automatic home view controller. Well, since we know that the login functionality works, let's go ahead and get rid of this label since we don't really need it anymore. And I'm going to get rid of this outlet. And I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to rewrite my view will appear method. We'll leave that in there, but we'll just say if not client is authenticated. So that means if the client is not authenticated, navigation controller perform segue with identifier, show login, and the sender is nil. So I just rewrote that view will appear method because I don't need that label anymore. So now if the client's not authenticated, it will just show the login view controller. All right, let's go ahead and add, we want to be able to play our quiz. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button using my object library. I'm going to call that button play. This time I am going to add some constraints. I'll do top layout guide. Let's see, I'll do leading space to container margin, and that should take care of it. Let's just run this to make sure that the play button shows up. And it shows up a little off screen. I'm not sure I like that. So I'm going to remove the constraints on this. Clear the constraints. Let's do this to vertical spacing. Let's do my alignment horizontally in container. Current canvas value, add the constraint. And it looks to be centered correctly there. That's better. Stop. So let's go ahead and create an action for when the play button is tapped. So I'll make this, let's do play button tapped. I'll make it an action. And the type will be a UI button. And I'm going to implement that in a little bit. But I'm just going to copy our two required and override methods here. I'll put those at the top. Stop. And that should be it for this home view controller for right now. Again, remembering later on I'm going to have to implement this play button tapped function. But for right now, this is okay. I need to now set up my game view controller. So let's go ahead and find some space to do that. I'll put it over here. Let's add a new view controller from my object library. I'm going to put it under my navigation controller. And as a reminder, the purpose of this project is not a education in user interface design. I'm going to do this just to kind of get the idea of using BaasBox. So my user interface is not going to be pretty. But keep in mind that I have to show the text of a question. I have to show 4 different answers for the question. I'm going to show a timer and a score. So let's go ahead and add those elements to this view controller now. I'm going to add a score label up here near the top, and I'll call it score 0. There. I'm going to add a text view. I'm going to make this one a little bit, not quite to the edge of the screen, but make it kind of big like that. And then I'm going to erase all this and just put question text as a placeholder so I can see it, knowing that it still takes up this whole area, but I just know the question text is going to be here. And I'm going to center it. And then I need 4 buttons, each to represent an answer. So let's go back to my library, choose button. I'm going to drag this button here. Remember, I need 4 of them. 2, 3, 4. I need another label for the timer. I think I'll just change that to be this. And then I need an activity indicator to show that the questions are being loaded. Once again, as you are going through this, please add constraints. I'm not going to add constraints right now, just for a time issue. But it is important to add constraints so that everything lines up correctly. Stop. Okay, so now that I have a rough layout of what my game is going to look like, let's add the controller that will control this view. So I'm going to do Command N, another Cocoa Touch class. I'll call it Game View Controller, and make sure it's in the My Quiz group. And then let's go to Main Storyboard and make sure that this game controller did I get it? Is using, there we go, the new game controller class we just created. All right, so let's open up our assistant editor using Game View Controller. We need to create outlets for each of these. So let's do, this is going to be score label. I'll call this question text. This will be answer 1. Answer 2. Answer 3. Answer 4. Okay, so there's, whoops, I forgot the timer label. And the activity indicator. That should be all our properties. Let's go ahead and add our required files above here. So just copy that from our login view controller. onto our game view controller. Okay. We have a little bit more configuration to do with our buttons. We need some way to tell which button is the correct answer. So we're going to use a property called tag. So I'm going to click on a button and click on my I think the attributes inspector. Yeah. I'm looking for tag. So this one should be 0, which is good. Make these alignment center. I'm going to click on this button. I want to make this tag 1. This button will be tag 2. And this button will be tag 3. What this is going to allow us to do later is to check to see if the tag of the button is equal to the correct answer. Stop. What that tag attribute is going to allow us to do is compare the correct answer to the button being clicked and see if it's correct. So just make sure that it's 0, 1, 2, 3 for the tags for each of those buttons. Stop. Then also for each button, let's make sure that the line break is set to word wrap. So if we get a long answer, it wraps within the button. So I want to set each of those to word wrap. Okay. So now our buttons are configured. So we still need a couple of additional properties that we're going to have to add manually that we can keep track of our stop. So now that our buttons are configured correctly, we need to add a couple more properties to help us keep track of our quiz. We need to know the questions. And the questions are going to be an array of type question. And it's going to equal a blank array for right now. Now notice we're getting an error because we haven't written the question class yet, and we're going to do that soon. So for right now, we're going to ignore this error. We're also going to need to know about our buttons. And that's also going to be an array of type UI button. And for right now, we'll make it a blank array. Then we're going to need a timer of type NS timer. We'll make it an optional since it's not going to be initialized when this class is created. We're going to need a score, and it's going to start off at 0. And we're going to need a timer value to help us count down, and it is also going to start off at 0. Okay, so the only error we have is our question, which is fine. So in our viewDidLoad method, we're going to set up some initial configuration of the game. So we are going to add our buttons to that array we just created. So we're going to let buttons equal answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, and answer 4. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to loop over the buttons. For example, for button in buttons, just a for in loop, button.setTitle to blank for state normal. Whoops, I did capital, it should be lowercase b. There we go. So all this does is, instead of saying answer 1, set title for state, answer 2, set title for state, I can do a quick loop that allows us to set this initial configuration. And that's why we put these buttons in an array. And then we're going to do the question text dot hidden equals true. Actually, we should also, oops, Can't do it, right? And then the spinner hides. Did I do? Oops, I called it activity indicator. Activity hides when true, hides when stopped, equals true. I also want to do button dot hidden equals true. What I want to do is when my application starts, I want to hide all the buttons so that the answers don't show up before the timer starts. So that should be the initial configuration of my controller. And again, we're going to write the questions soon. So let's go back to our main storyboard and configure our play button. So let's go back to the home view controller and let's implement this play button tapped. So all I wanted to do when I tap the play button, I want to go to my game controller. So I'll go navigation controller, perform segue with identifier, we'll call it show game, and we'll make the sender nil. So again, we don't have a show game segue yet, but let's go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to click on the navigation controller, control, drag. I'm going to do show detail. I'm going to click the segue, make the identifier show game. All right, now let's run this to make sure it works, but we're going to get an error because of this line here. So I'm going to comment this line out temporarily just to see if our play button works and our game controller works. Let's see the app build. Let's go ahead and hit play. Okay. Remember the buttons were hidden and the question text were hidden, so all we see are the score label and the timer label, which is exactly what we should be seeing. So far everything works. You see we have no way to go back because we're going to let the user go through the questions. When they're done, it'll automatically take them back to the home view controller. So far everything's working. We just need to implement the question model and start adding some questions.